Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabby Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Green. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme starting with the letter F. Things like fibbing, future, and fentanyl.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives and look to the experts for insights and ideas.
Today, we're going to talk about fraud, specifically the kind perpetuated by modern-day con artists and grifters.
That's right. If you've opened a streaming platform or a newspaper lately, you've likely been inundated with stories about people who grossly misrepresent themselves for their own personal gain.
Kind of seems like a trend right now.
Our interest in it is definitely a trend, but it turns out that pretending to be something you're not to get something you want is the oldest story around. So we are going to talk about fraud, but really we're going to talk about fraudsters. We're going to talk about some people. Really, we're going to just focus on two young women. The country and really the world has been captivated by these stories of the way that they both, in different ways and similar ways, manipulated very wealthy, powerful, connected people into giving them millions and millions of dollars.
Is one of them Anna?
One of them is Anna Delvey, aka Anna Sorokin. And although there's no doubt in my mind that my daughter Anna would be charming enough to convince people to give her money, but she would never be so poorly intentioned. And then, or actually, well, we'll get into it. I don't know if Anna Delvey was really so badly intentioned. I think she was very misunderstood in a lot of ways. We're also going to talk about another woman of recent note, especially in the news lately, Elizabeth Holmes, who, of course, founded the now defunct medical tech company Theranos. Have you heard of both of these people, I take it?
I have, and I just want to do a little disclaimer and say that women are not fraudsters more than men. This is just a case of Gabby and Joanne saying, you know, we're not putting women up on a pedestal to say that all the bad things in the world that are done by men. Sometimes women do bad things as well.
Well, actually, one of the reasons that I selected both of these women, because there are plenty of men who do this kind of thing. You should watch the Firefest documentary about Billy McFarland. If you're interested in learning about that, we will link it in the show notes because it's bananas. And he's really was up to a lot of bad. I actually chose both of these because I think that there is, and we'll get into this when we talk about the way they were portrayed in the media, but I think that there is a lot of sexism in the ways that the bad deeds of both Anna Delvey, which we're going to call her even though her real name was Anna Sorokin, Anna Delvey and Elizabeth Holmes have been portrayed and received. I think we have been much harder on them than we would be on women. Like, for example, I mean, we'll get into this later, but like how many times has, I hate to even conjure his name, but our former president, number 45, how many times has it come out that he has lied egregiously? And of course, there are many, many people who hate him, but he still is in a lot more power than both of these women who are currently in prison. So,
you know, it's so interesting because I feel a certain sense of shame when a woman behaves badly, the same way that I do if a Jewish person behaves badly. It's like one of mine, and I expect better, and I want, you know, women to take the high road. Do you feel that too? I mean, I think it's stupid that I feel that, but it is just something that I often feel.
You know, I think I definitely relate to that. I think that I certainly feel extra excited when a woman, comes out on top. But I do think that one of the most problematic things about the way we treat men versus the way we treat women is that the humanity, which includes the flaws of women, are so vastly, the way that they are, the way that women's humanity is understood and accepted is completely diametrically opposed to the way we are with men. And again, not to bring up the 2016 election, but if you look at the way that many of which were very true, things that Hillary Clinton did wrong in her past versus Donald Trump, it was like equal levels of vitriol on both sides that we had for these people, when in my opinion, their mistakes were very different. But we don't, sometimes it feels like it's like this mommy projection, like we are much more forgiving of fathers who screw up, who don't show up, who don't do what they're supposed to do, who do bad things. We like to see a dad redeemed. A bad mother, forget it. I think that approach, and of course, the stories we're going to talk about today are not about mothers and fathers, but I think that the same logic gets applied to men versus women.
Today, we're talking about women who are highly educated, women who manage in a very short time and at a very young age to amass significant power. And that's very different than anything that happened in the past.
Interestingly, they both appeared to be highly educated. And they had certainly a lot of street smarts in a lot of ways. But I think really what I think we're talking, it's interesting. Class and the appearance of prestige really is a major factor in these stories.
Oh, and they're both white.
They are both white. And there's a great article that we'll link in the show notes called "We Sure Do Love Our White Lady Grifter Stories." And yeah, we sure do.
Let's jump in and just talk about Anna Delvey. What's her story?
Okay, great. So Anna Delvey is born Anna Sorokin in Russia to German parents. And for her whole backstory, I highly recommend watching the Inventing Anna miniseries on Netflix. It's excellent. But I'm going to just sort of walk you through what this lady does. So she's interning at some point in 2013. She's interning for a French fashion magazine called Purple Magazine. And she goes to New York City for Fashion Week. And she finds it easier to make friends in New York than in Paris, so she decides to stay. And while she's there, she's sort of representing herself as an heiress, as a wealthy, she's trying to fit in these fancy social groups in New York. So she comes up with this idea that's going to be her meal ticket, and it's the Anna Delvey Foundation, which is a private members club and art foundation. Now, this is not someone who has any business naming a foundation after herself, but she's got a lot of moxie and a lot of confidence, and that is going to be a theme that we're going to see over and over again. So she starts meeting with wealthy investors and artists, other people in the art world, pitching this idea, and it starts to gain some traction. And she does this by schmoozing, basically. She socializes. She goes to parties. She rubs elbows with important people. She works the room. And people just start to buy it. So things come up where, so for example, an artist who she was friendly with became suspicious of her after multiple incidents of non-payment. So what she would do is the thing is with these wealthy people, what she figured out very quickly is that big money is important, but small money, paying for dinner, paying for meals, in many cases even paying for hotel stays, that's not a big deal. You can ask someone to cover you. And so people started to sort of pick up on the scent that there was something wrong after multiple issues of non-payment. So she pretended to be a wealthy heiress and was bragging about she bragged a lot. She would name drop a lot, talk about her fancy clothes. And most people bought it. But then there were people who started to suspect that something was going on. So an art student who went on to become a famous artist named Michael Zufu Wang was at a dinner party with her. And she found out that he was going to attend the Venice Biennale, which is an art festival. And she asked if she could accompany him. He agreed, and he booked the flight and hotel room for her with the understanding that he would be reimbursed. It was like a $3,000 claim. And that was I believe, the first time she did what would go on to become her shtick, which was she pretended to forget that she had agreed to pay for this, pretended she was flighty and spacey and absent-minded, and kept putting him off more and more and more. He eventually was repaid, but she repaid him from a Venmo account with an unfamiliar name. And this later turned out, of course, to be fraud. So what we find with her is that she's moving as she's rubbing elbows with these people, meeting with investors, trying to get them to fund this foundation, which it remains to be seen if in her head she really believed that this foundation was going to happen, or if it was just this idea that she had that she knew would just be like a source of income. Point being, it's not clear whether she knew she was conning everyone or whether this was a case of, what we see in a lot of times with compulsive liars, they believe the lies. So have you seen...
So is there a certain amount of like narcissistic personality disorder or this delusions of grandeur that are going on in the people that perpetrate this sort of fraud where they convince themselves? I mean, I'm thinking about Bernie Madoff. I mean, did he really believe that he was defrauding all these people whose trust had been placed in him? Or did he just think it would all work out in the end?
I don't know about Bernie, but my sense certainly of Anna Delvey, and we'll talk about Elizabeth Holmes in a minute, but my sense is that these schemes, whether they're conscious schemes or, something that, or like a lie someone's telling themselves.
Like a personality disorder.
That it comes from, like my most compassionate read is that it comes from a sense of not being enough and needing these markers of success to prove to oneself and, maybe, and oneself via one's peers in a lot of ways to prove that they are in fact enough. I think that it comes from a sense of being not good enough and broken. Anna Delvey was, and again, the Hulu or the Netflix documentary they do a great depiction of her childhood. But she grew up, I think, poor and then middle class. But she went to a prep school with wealthy people, and I think that that's a challenging dynamic, especially for a teenage girl. When you see your peers with all of these, again, like markers of wealth and
class
for that time in class. Right, exactly. And it's an easy way. It's I don't have a hard time seeing the point A to point B journey that teenage Anna Delvey developed the sense that being good enough was having fancy clothes and success and power. And I really understand how that laid the groundwork for what ended up happening. I think, though, that the machine that propelled this disaster forward was that she kept on getting away with it.
Well, that's the thing right there. And that's where my compassion runs dry.
Right.
Because we all grew up with kids like this, right? I'm sure everyone listening has a story of that person who put herself or himself forth as something he or she was not. and manipulated everybody along the way. But I think it bears mention that all those people who were manipulated kind of wanted to be manipulated in some fashion, and they chose not to pick up on the clues. Obviously, there were some people who did pick up on the clues, but we're willing to let a few things go by. It's always bugged me that the higher up you go in the celebrity, up the celebrity ladder, the less you have to pay for anything. Should be the other way around, right?
Right. Mm-hmm,
I mean, people who just are constantly being comped this and that, and it's so grossly unfair, and yet it's the way it works. So that if you, in fact, can convince someone that you are really wealthy, then you don't have to pay for anything.
Well, first of all, we love being around what we perceive as wealth and prestige and power. Also, we love the story of a badass, self-made, successful young woman. And I think in many cases, the investors she was working with were men. And
and she was also good looking, by the way.
She's very pretty. And I think that they like I think there's what they liked. And then I think there's the what we like. And I think this really comes up in the Elizabeth Holmes story in some ways even more. We want it to be so that this heiress named Anna Delvey is starting this amazing art foundation that's going to both do good and be a cool place for fancy people to hang out. We want it to be real. And I think that's why she kept on getting away with it. And it makes me think of this silly story, which is that when I was growing up, I figured out, I'm 3 years older than my little brother, and I figured out that I could say anything and he would believe it. And my parents would leave me at home to babysit him, and I would tell him whoppers, just huge lies. I remember telling him that the remote control was also a phone if you pressed certain buttons. And then I would pretend to make phone calls and say terrible things about him to his friends, and he would believe it. I told him that the Capri Suns in the fridge were alcoholic, and I drank one and pretended to be drunk. And he got so upset and thought, I was like 11 years old or something.
You nasty girl.
I know. And when I think about it, and this is not like something that I did in other aspects of my life, but I just told him bigger and bigger whoppers. Told him he was adopted. I think many big sisters do this. And he just believed me. And with each time, every time I amped up the lie, I was like, there's no way I'm going to get away with this. I kind of got addicted to the thrill of pulling it off. And I'm certain that at least in the case of Anna Delvey, that played a part. That's
why you're so compassionate. No wonder, because you feel guilty. Have you apologized to him?
I'm a little micro Anna Delvey. Oh, yes. Certainly.
He's okay. He's forgiven you?
I'm really sorry. Yeah, he got over it.
Because he listens to every episode, I'm sure.
Yes. Oh, he's a very big... Actually, he has listened to several episodes, so I don't want to... He has listened to it. So if you're listening, hi, Jeremy. I love you. I'm really sorry about all the lies.
But you really were adopted.
Yes, exactly. My mom and dad don't love you. So yeah, he... I know how that on my very small scale experience, I know how that works.
Well, it's seductive. As you have some success, it's like, how far can I take this? Right. So, and then eventually you get tripped up because I believe that there's some justice in the world somewhere. Donald Trump will pay for his sins, I believe.
God willing.
Let's move on to Elizabeth Holmes.
Well, I just have to tell you this one part. Anna Delvey used Microsoft Word to create fake bank statements for her investment meetings to show that she had $60 million in Swiss bank accounts, but could not access them because this was her lie. She has $60 million, but she can't access it because it's in trust in Switzerland and she's in the US. She hired an attorney this way. She pulled one over. She pulled so many over on so many people using Microsoft Word, Clippy, to make fake bank statements. It is as an author, they editors don't even want to see book proposals in Microsoft Word anymore. They want you to use. I mean, I couldn't believe that. I thought for sure she had to be using InDesign or Photoshop or something like that. So anyway, just had to share that part. So anyway, eventually it all catches up with her. She gets arrested. And she still has many, many fans, people who are interested in what she's going to do next. So let's move on to someone who's a little more current in the news, and that is Elizabeth Holmes. And
before we do that, though, let's take a break and hear from our sponsor.
We're going to talk about Elizabeth Holmes. She was recently convicted of many, many counts of fraud. And this one, for me, was really heartbreaking. Did you follow the Elizabeth Holmes story before it all went to hell?
Yeah, I would say marginally familiar with it, but became more interested, of course, as the proverbial stuff hit the fan. Yeah,
when it fell apart.
When questions were being raised, actually.
Right. I remember following this because she's exactly 2 years younger than I am. And it was so exciting this idea that she had, she was getting so much attention for. The idea was she had this company called Theranos. It's, as we know, now defunct. It soared in valuation. It was valued at $9 billion.
And wasn't she a Stanford dropout?
Yeah, I think she made it through her freshman year of Stanford, and a little bit. So yeah, I think she went through 1 year of Stanford, and she dropped out to create a startup. She was surrounded by people who were creating startups. She dropped out to create this startup that was going to conduct blood testing using 1 drop of blood from a finger prick, sort of like the way a diabetic would test their blood. And the idea was to sort of democratize and vastly improve the way that people stay on top of their health. A lot of people stay away from getting blood work done because they're afraid of needles, because it's expensive. And she had this idea that it was going to be as easy as doing a finger prick test and putting and she had somehow come up with the science to be able to actually conduct these blood tests with such a small quantity of blood. So somehow she manages to convince former professor and a lot of other scientists to join her company. She raises millions and millions of dollars from many, many important people, including former Secretary of State George Shultz. And she raises lots and lots of money. And of course, what she knows, and I don't know if she really knew it from the entire time, she seemed to really believe in the concept. But basically, the problem was the technology did not, in fact, work. It never did. And so with increasing urgency, she tries to hire more and more scientists to try to make it work, and it doesn't work. And then eventually the goal goes from trying to somehow make it work to trying to cover up the fact that it doesn't. And along the way, there were a lot of tests conducted where incorrect medical information was given to people who thought that they were participating in a clinical trial and they were going to get flea blood work done. And a lot of people were very badly affected. I believe the total amount that she defrauded was $121 million.
It's astounding because it's perfectly reasonable for a startup to fail. It's perfectly reasonable to think that you have a brand new technology that's going to do wonders, and then for that technology not to be able to deliver. So it seems to me where the fraud came in was in her taking that next step to try to prove that it was working when it wasn't working. And that's really where the fraud happened, right? And then she got deeper and deeper and deeper into it, trying to show what wasn't happening.
Well, one thing that both of these stories have in common is that the fraud really extends from, it's not just that they're misrepresenting the business that they have to do. They're not just misrepresenting, in the case of Anna Delvey, she's not just misrepresenting the money that she has tied up in Swiss bank accounts. And in the case of Elizabeth Holmes, she wasn't just misrepresenting the technology for her invention. It was, where I think they went astray is how deeply they got into the fraud that was the misrepresentation of who they were. And I think what happened was when they started getting attention, and in the case of Elizabeth Holmes, a lot of money, and in Anna Delvey's case as well, in a different way. And when being someone they really weren't, and being someone who they were to try to repair how badly they felt inside, that's my analysis. When that started to really pay off, this fake persona, this fraudulent person that they'd invented, that was when things got really bad. Like, I really wonder what would have happened, to your point, if Elizabeth Holmes had said, I think I can do this, hired some scientists, and it didn't work out. And maybe if the American people weren't so in love with the idea of her technology being true, and the story, more importantly, the story of Elizabeth Holmes being true, what would have happened if then she failed and then had to maybe go back to Stanford and finish school, but really loved the entrepreneurial experience and then tried again? What would have happened?
Well, there are many
maybe
people.
She would have succeeded.
Of course. And there are many, many successful people whose stories start with 1, 2, 3, 4 failures before they hit it big. And I think part of what this whole exploration into fraud and who these people are who perpetrate fraud, this inability to fail, this inability to stand up and say, I really am not this person I'm trying to be, and call it quits, and, like basically fold, right? As one would in a card game, just like say, that's it. But to keep going and keep gambling with other people's money and perpetuating these lie upon lie upon lie upon lie. It's sad. They're both in prison, right?
Yeah, well,
They'd
right.
be good roommates.
Elizabeth Holmes was just sentenced, and she, I think, has been pregnant twice. And so that's, of course, like during, from the time between when she was arrested and just, I think it was like last week or the week before when she was sentenced, she got married and had 1, maybe 2 babies. So that slowed down the process a bit. And yeah, I believe Anna Delvey is in prison. Anna Sorokin is in prison as well. Your point about failure was about how the importance of embracing failure was making me think about, I'm teaching my Anna, my daughter, we're doing handwriting right now. So she's I'm teaching her letters. So there's this great program called Handwriting Without Tears. So I got the whole kit. And you practice a letter on a little mini chalkboard. Then there's a workbook, and you practice each letter, and they have, the exact right order in which you make the pencil strokes. And she's doing great, but of course it's not always easy. And we've been talking a lot about when she messes up, she's a little addicted to the eraser, right? Because she's never had an eraser before. Because she's 4.5. She's only ever used crayons and markers and stuff. So now she's got an eraser. And I noticed that she was a little obsessive about erasing any problematic mark. And she said something about the fact that I kept saying to her, it's okay. You're just learning. It's fine. It's okay. And she said recently, I think I said something like, it's okay. You have to fail before you can get it. And she said, what does fail mean? And I said, it's when you try to do something and it doesn't work out, then you got to just try again. And she said, so it's like a mistake. And I said, yeah. And she said, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And I explained the idea to her that it's okay to fail as many times as you need to in order to learn to do something. And in explaining that, I, of course, had to confront that, I don't always believe that about myself. It's fine for everyone else to fail. It's not okay for me to fail, though. And I feel like having a positive relationship with failure is what prevents big, massive, disastrous failures later on.
You know what? Failure is an F word, and I think this deserves a whole episode at some point, don't you?
Oh my God, did we never do a failure episode?
I don't believe we have.
Yeah, well, we have to.
We can talk about all the times we failed.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm failing more and more lately because it happens, I'm forgetful, and I think I'm going to do something and I don't get it together to do, to learn all the steps in the process, and then I can't get online or open the Zoom for all the people.
Let me tell you how many failed recipes have happened in this kitchen, right? Many failed things.
It's important to learn how to fail, and we will focus, to use another F word, on that at a later date. But today was fraud. So what's your big takeaway from having done all this research on Anna Delvey and Elizabeth Holmes and the fraud that they committed?
I think that, what I wish for them is that they had found a way to come to terms with the fact that whatever the picture of perfection, success, power that they had in their heads when their personalities were forming when they were younger, I wish that they had found a way to love and accept who they are, because in both cases, it just seemed like this was a need. This came from a need to compensate for feeling not enough. And I wish for them that they had felt that they were enough so that they didn't have to go through and put so many people through what they did. Of course, this is not to minimize any compassion for the true victims of their crimes, of which there are many. I certainly would never want to minimize that. And I think they both deserve to be in prison. I wish for them that they hadn't felt the pressure, whether it was external or internal, to fabricate these massive lies rather than just lean into who they really were and live real lives. So my takeaway is learn to love yourself, accept yourself. Don't commit wire fraud. Make yourself feel better.
That's a good takeaway. Gabby has lots in the show notes if you want to do a deeper dive into this. Thanks so much for listening to All the F Words today. I'm Joanne Green, and she's Gabby Moskowitz. And
you can listen anywhere you get your podcast. Please rate and review us. You can also hang out with us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Or you can email us. We are allthefwordspod@gmail.com.
And my memoir, By Accident, A Memoir of Letting Go, is now available on pre-order. You can find it at, hopefully, your local independent bookseller. Certainly, it's available through my local independent booksellers, but also through Barnes & Noble and Amazon and everywhere else.
If you go to indiebooks.com and look it up, By Accident by Joanne Green, it will tell you which local bookstores you can pre-order it from.
Thanks, Gabby.
Yeah.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.